Top of the hour, let's talk about what President Trump is now saying. It was almost till about last evening, surety that was coming across that a breakthrough in the peace deal may happen. And finally, President Trump will accept what Iran has to offer in a peace deal via the mediator, which is Pakistan, as Asim Munir was expected to travel to Tehran. But in the recent hours, all of these developments have not happened. Asim Munir has not gone to Tehran. So what does it indicate? Is that, the stalemate going to extend? Because President Trump does not seem to be in a hurry. But this is something which has been, he's been talking about the talks being on the borderline, the negotiations that has been taking place. And after concluding his two-day visit to China, President Trump was of the opinion that he was ready to attack Iran once again to resume the military operations, but was asked to be put on hold by the Gulf leaders as they believed that the negotiations still had a chance. So despite the optimism coming in from Washington, Srinjoy, good morning. The diplomatic deadlock between US and Iran still continues. So we don't know, is a peace deal happening or not?
The Iran-America situation has been like this for a long, long time. The war began on the 28th of February. It lasted 40 days. And since then, we have had a tenuous ceasefire. Some breaks in the ceasefire, but overall a ceasefire, which really isn't a ceasefire in many senses. If there were to be a ceasefire, a proper ceasefire, then, if nothing else, there would be no naval blockade. So there are too many things here that have to be sorted out. And at this point, as has been mentioned before, after those 40 days of fighting, both sides declared victory. So if you declare victory, you set your own terms. And the terms that America have set and the ones that Iran has set have nothing to do with each other. It's almost like they fought two separate wars and won. So as a result, the terms have nothing in common. So if the terms have nothing in common, then it's very difficult to arrive at a peace agreement.
Yes.
And that's exactly what the point is. Just for two examples, the Iranians want the naval blockade to be lifted.
Yes.
The Americans don't want that.
Yes.
The Iranians...
So that really talks about, Srinjoy, are we back to square one? Because if, those was the objectives in the first place that the US decided to launch the military operations, what has now been achieved after 40 days? Let's welcome back Sierra Claire on the broadcast. Sierra, thank you very much once again. And we are also joined by Neeraj Sharma, international relations expert. Neeraj, good morning. What is your point of view as far as President Trump is concerned? There is still no clarity on what happens next.
But I think there is good morning. There's a de-escalation in the attacks and in the aggression. And I think this itself is a good sign. Now, whosoever may be trying to initiate the peace talks, I think end of the day, it is Iran and America, basically the key stakeholders, who will have to sit and decide how many ever mediators are brought in between. I feel that this is very important for the energy, food security, and fossil fuels of any country, that at this moment there is a deal, a peace deal, which is brought on the table and is adhered by both the parties.
Well, because this is something that the entire world is watching very closely and wants certain positive developments to happen with regards to a peace deal. 80 days almost into this conflict that we are looking at, because the issue of enriched uranium, that continues to remain as a major sticking point, with Iranian media reporting that their supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who till now has not made any physical appearance, he seems to have ordered that Iran's enriched uranium will not be handed over or will not be transferred out of the country. Now, this position is sharply contrasting with what President Trump's statements has been, because he's been insisting that Iran under no condition will allow to have a nuclear weapon. And this is something which the US says, and President Trump says that he is ready to blow Iran to bits. But when we speak of President Trump, he says that they are also waiting for the right answers to come in from the Iranian side. So there has been multiple proposals and counter proposals that has been coming in, and multiple of them have been rejected by President Trump.
Very right on the borderline, believe me. If we don't get the right answers, it goes very quickly. We're all ready to go. We have to get the right answers. It would have to be a complete 100% good answers. And if we do, we save a lot of time, energy, and lives, most importantly.
So when we talk about the sticking points, there are two issues there, because then that means that the stalemate, the deadlock continues. What happens to the fate of Iran's uranium stockpiles? Because here, the opinion that is coming in from America's side that US will take Iran's nuclear dust as what the President Trump describes enriched uranium. However, Iran is of the opinion that it will not be allowed to be transferred out of the country, and no another party or any other country involvement is something which Iran is seeking. Then especially when it comes to curbing on Iran nukes, President Trump is of the opinion that Iran immediately has to halt enrichment indefinitely. However, Iran on the other side says that we are ready for a peace talk, but as far as talks on nuclear or enrichment is concerned, it wants to be postponed or deferred at least for 5 years. Then the flashpoint over Strait of Hormuz. Before the war began, Strait of Hormuz was a free waterway. However, there is a blockade. There is already a blockade imposed by IRGC, and then there is a US naval blockade. And this is something, when it comes to Hormuz under Iran's jurisdiction, this is something which Tehran has been now saying, especially when it comes to a new kind of an agency that has now been developed so that it monetizes and, gets all the revenues there as far as war compensation and reparations are concerned. Meanwhile, Times Now's managing editor, Zaka Jacob, spoke to Jeffrey Jacks as well, and hear what he has to say. Jeffrey Jacks, when it comes to hanging by a thread, that seems to be the very statement that has come in on part of President Trump. Borderline is something what we are looking at. Possibility of a peace deal, but also no clarity.
Let's talk about the other make or break issue, which is the Strait of Hormuz and the fact that it is now shut. It has been shut for the better part of the last 2.5 months. Iran has now restricted shipping through the strait. Vessels are forced to negotiate some kind of a transit arrangement with the Iranians, particularly with the IRGC. The United States is carrying out a naval blockade just off the Strait of Hormuz. It controls which ships enter and exit Iranian ports. And this is a big problem for a lot of countries, including for countries like India. How does this deadlock over the Strait of Hormuz, the shutting of the Strait of Hormuz, how can that be resolved?
Again, we should remember the real history, which is that Iran and the United States signed a ceasefire, and then Israel immediately broke the ceasefire by its continuing invasion of Lebanon. Then Iran said, well, in the midst of this complete failure of Israel to abide by the ceasefire we just signed, we will not open the Strait of Hormuz, as was a condition of the ceasefire. And then the United States said, well, we'll block Iran from trade. We'll put a naval blockade. Then the United States prevailed on Israel to supposedly halt its invasion, which wasn't reality, but at least partly it was agreed. And Iran said, okay, we will open the Strait of Hormuz as per the ceasefire, at which point the United States said, but we'll continue the blockade because we have other interests. You see, the United States does not deal honorably, fairly, or in a trustworthy manner. This is a problem. How can you have a ceasefire when the United States and Israel don't abide by it? How can you open the Strait of Hormuz when that's agreed, but then the United States puts on the blockade? It's not just incidental that, oh, by the way, the United States has a blockade. The United States put on a blockade that prevented the Strait of Hormuz from being reopened. This is the problem. If the United States behaved like a normal country, that you negotiate, you reach an agreement, and then you implement it, the Strait of Hormuz would be opened.
Well, this is something which is not coming across, when it comes to being unfavorable for America to actually resume when it comes to the military action on Tehran. This is something that the Gulf nations also do not want. This is something that the world also does not want, because the pressure that has been building up in the last 80 days, and this is something which has also reached to India with regards to economic challenges. That's something that the Prime Minister has talked about of being the citizens to be aware of. Sierra, what is your understanding? Even if we talk about tense conversations that is being said that happened between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, even when it comes to both sides, Israel and US, because they jointly launched a attack on Iran, are they on the same page?
Well, I think we have to look at what the way that Iran is looking at this. The way that they're looking at this is they want to delay because they think that politically the United States doesn't want to continue this war. And I think there's a distinction we have to make here. The American people were fine with this war when we were winning the war. What the American people are, getting to be a little hesitant about is this whole ceasefire, not ceasefire, extended blockade, which is affecting countries like India as well as the US. And so the American people would support action if President Trump resumed it. And they also, of course, support a peace deal, which President Trump said is his preference. And I'm sure that that's Israel's preference as well. But, realistically, I don't think that Iran is going to give up their enriched uranium.
Yes.
And I think that Israel knows that, too.
Well, then, it brings us back to square one. Then what happens to the objectives that the United States actually wanted to achieve? What all has come out of it in the last 80 days. But there is a ceasefire, but a fragile one that seems to be holding. But the world wants peace. India already had always projected that it stands for dialogue and diplomacy. Neeraj sir, thank you very much for joining in. Sierra, thank you once again for joining us here on the broadcast.